you as a member state would either have to say present or present and voting. These are your two options of giving your roll call as. Now, what is the difference between present and voting? Anybody? Yes, ma'am?
When you say present and voting, that means you're going to vote. And if you say that you're going to vote, that means you have to vote. And you have to give an opinion when it comes to the voting part of it.
Absolutely. Absolutely right. That whenever you are saying that I'm present and voting, that means you will be voting during the voting procedure, either in affirmative or negative. When a particular matter comes up in which your country is kind of sandwiched with its policy and you want to get out of the situation and say that I would not like to vote in this particular situation, I don't want to get stuck between the fights of Israel and Palestine, then if you are saying present and voting, you cannot get out of the situation. You have to say either yes or no, either Israel or Palestine. Okay? But when you are saying only present, here, this gives you an option to abstain during this particular resolution voting process. Right? So what happens is, when you give your roll call as present, in future when the resolution will be voted upon, you can either say yes, or you can say no, or you say I abstain. Okay? The meaning of abstain being that I am not involved in this process, or I would not like to express my vote either for the resolution or against the resolution. I wish to be neutral. Now, why this is very important is because when a particular country's policy is being formed, every country has its national policy and set of foreign policies, and their set of ideas and thoughts on different matters, different world affairs. Now, let's say when Obama administration took over back in 2008, they formed their set of foreign policies in the way the United States is going to deal with other countries of the world or other issues that require the thought of the world, right? So, those set of foreign policies are reflected in your voting pattern. Okay? I'll give you an example that a very common example that I always give is the issue of Israel and Palestine and the role of India in it. Now, India, right from we have a historical connection with the holy land of Jerusalem and the nearby countries out there. So the connection makes it difficult to take the side of either Israel or Palestine. What India has always said at the UN General Assembly is that we do not wish to comment on what should happen. However, we want the peace and development of the region. We want Israel and Palestine to be freely existing states, etc. But the moment the resolution comes on voting that whether Palestine should have a free state or not, or on different topics, India has never taken a side. India has never said that, okay, Israel is right, or Palestine is right, or the Palestinian Liberation Authority is right. What India has done is it's kept out of it. Why? Because tomorrow, if Palestine becomes a proper member state of the UN, India does not want to be in bad connections or negotiations with it. At the same time, India realizes the importance of Israel in its world affairs and foreign policy and its geopolitics. So that's another reason why India would not like to make enemies with Israel. So therefore, neither Israel nor Palestine, I abstain. Okay? So this shows your foreign policy. Your voting shows your foreign policy. Right? So, and there's only one exception to this rule of India, is when Palestine became a non-member state at the UN. That was the only time when India had voted for Palestine, saying that yes, we would like to incorporate Palestine as a non-member state, which didn't have problems with Israel because of some other bilateral issues going on. So firstly, roll call. Is there anything that you have to ask me relating to roll call? None? No queries, no questions? Yes, ma'am?
Say that you're present in voting and say you gave the example of India with Palestine and Israel. You being the delegate, can you have the authority or autonomy to, when you say yes and you're voting and you're going to actually, say that particular topic comes up with Palestine and Israel? How would you behave in that? When you're in that situation, when you say you're going to be voting?
So when you have already said present in voting and such a situation comes up, so how are you going to get out of the situation?
Yeah.
Is that the question?
Yeah.
Yes. in that case, as an individual country, your skills of diplomacy is going to come into place, wherein you incorporate or try to negotiate with the main drafters of resolution and incorporate a very essential clause into the resolution, wherein you can give sufficient reasons to either support it or not support it. Now, this is confusing, but I'll just give you another example. That let's take up this issue, Israel and Palestine. So now, what India has, let's say India is given the roll call as present in voting, and we have a situation out here where you have to support either Israel or Palestine. What very likely what can happen is that the Indian Foreign Secretary or the Indian Ministry of External Affairs negotiates with Israel in such a way that they put in a bilateral clause in that particular resolution, or they agree to enter into a bilateral agreement in some near future, right? And then India can give its reasons saying that I had to support Israel at that point in time because we had some other negotiations going on which couldn't have taken place because until unless we voted for Israel. So that's a very valid way to come out of that situation without making any legal outcome. So that again depends on your diplomatic and negotiating skills and how do you support yourself. And another example is that often it has happened that countries have said present in voting and got into such situations. So there, they either say a yes or a no, which is both are against their foreign policy, and then they take it with rights. They say that I would like to give a vote yes, but with rights. What are rights? I'll come to that during the voting procedure again. But rights is something that I want to explain my voting stand, that why I said yes. Okay? So that is called yes with rights. We'll come to that, and that will make more sense when we are discussing the voting procedure. So any queries related to roll call apart from that? Yes?
Is the roll call a part of the conference or is it a precursor to the conference?
It is a part of the conference. Without the roll call, we cannot proceed further. Reason being that the roll call, another thing what the roll call does at an administrative level is, it sets up the quorum for the house. Let's say we have 50 members present over here. Okay? So out of these 50 members, we will take 1/5 of the committee as the quorum. That means we should have at all times 10 members in order to vote upon a resolution or in order to begin our discussions. So that is the essential part of the roll call. Without a quorum, we cannot proceed.
The timing the conference starts is when the roll call starts.
Right. Ideally, every session should have a roll call before we start.
Yeah, so if you said present, are you still allowed to vote?
Pardon?
If you said present, are you still allowed to vote?
Absolutely. In present, in fact, you are given another way of voting, which is abstain. So you get 3 options instead of 2. When you say present in voting, your only 2 options are yes or no. But when you say present only, then you have the option saying yes or no or abstain.
So what is the benefit of saying present and voting?
It again depends on your country's policy and the topic that you're discussing. I'll give you an example that, let's say disarmament. We are talking about nuclear disarmament over here. Let's talk about even nuclear disarmament is a issue which is very much contentious. So let's talk about small arms, disarming small arms like guns, pistols, revolvers, their trafficking, etc. This is one topic in which your country's policy has always been for the resolution. So then you are very confident that whatever is the outcome, we are going to make a resolution in these lines and we are going to vote for it. So there, when you are confident about your country's policy, you say yes, present in voting, and during the voting procedure, you support it saying yes. So where there is no grey area, there is only black and white, there is no grey area between, so you can go and say present in voting. Right? So that again depends on your research and previous voting records of the country. Thereby you can go ahead and say present in voting, and during the final resolution either say yes or no, depending on the country's policy.
So now the example that you gave, basically when we say present, we have 3 options, which one additional option is to abstain.
Absolutely.
So is there any clear advantage of actually choosing to say present in voting? I mean, it makes the way you describe it, it makes only sense to say present because whether or not you think that you have a clear black and white opinion, it's always nice to have that additional option to abstain. Is there any clear advantage of actually saying present in voting?
most clear advantage of saying present and voting shows your research. If your country, in all its roll call records, has gone ahead and said present and voting, and if as a delegate you are unaware of it and you want to be on the safer side and you say present, it shows your research. It shows that you are not availing to your country's foreign policy, which has always been to say present and voting, and then go ahead and say a yes to the resolution or a no to the resolution, and instead of that you prefer to be on the safer side. So it shows your research to the executive board members, because they will be well versed with the roll call, previous history of your country's roll call, with your country's voting structure, voting procedure, everything. So it is again very technical an issue, but it reflects your research there. Yeah.
Every member in the United Nations is a representative of a specific nation. Okay.
Yeah.
So my question is that whenever the roll call takes place, then the person is called in the name of nation or the specific name?
State. The name of the state. Name of the state. Like you'll be called like either delegate of Argentina or Argentina, but no name comes in there, right? Because you don't have your individual identity out there until unless your name is specifically called and for some special purposes. But apart from that, you are representing your country, and your only identity will be the name of your country or the delegate of that country. Yes.
When we are addressing the chair, is it supposed to be always in, like suppose my country is Israel, so do I say Israel thinks or do I say we think? I mean, how do we address the chair?
That's a point of personal pronoun there,
Yeah.
and I will get to that while we are talking about the speech. Okay? Yeah. Any further queries? Yeah.
The roll call is taken at the beginning of the conference.
Yes.
So then if you in the beginning you say present and voting,
Yes.
so that would be for various agendas. Like, I mean, in the sense that various issues that come under the agenda. So like, I mean, let's say that I know that maybe on one specific one I have a very clear opinion. But because at the beginning of the conference I've said present and voting, I'll have to say yes and no to all of the issues that are being discussed that are going to be put up for vote. So while I might have a very clear idea, as in, is it asked of us every time when a vote is taken, or is it going to be asked just in the beginning and throughout the conference we have to make sure that we give a yes and no?
Technically speaking, there are going to be roll calls. A roll call should ideally happen before every session commences. That means you have a session, let's say from 9 o'clock in the morning till 12. At 12 you break for lunch, giving an example. The moment you reconvene after lunch, your roll call should be taken again, ideally. But your vote, ultimately your vote is on just one resolution. So you are not going to be voting again and again. So all your policies, all your opinions, all your views come in that one particular resolution. And either you are against that resolution or for that resolution, which is going to reflect only once at the end. Right? Any other queries regarding roll call? Yes.
What if there's a difference between opinions within the delegation about the voting?
Yeah, you mean to say like your members of your own school or something like that? Like I'm unable to understand your question.
Suppose that suppose there's an Indian delegation,
Okay.
and within the delegation there's a difference that how I vote if she doesn't want to vote.
Okay, difference of opinion within the delegation, like in the ideal level at the United Nations, right? Okay, in that case, the decision taken by the senior most person in the delegation, senior most not in terms of age, but in terms of designation and superiority, right? That person's decision to vote forms the part of the actual vote. And it is not again influenced by personal opinion, it is again totally guided by foreign policy. So every vote given at the United Nations is not your personal opinion, but your foreign policy. Right? Any queries? Yes.
The roll call will obviously be taken before the resolution is passed. So it will be more better to say present and voting on to say present before the resolution is passed. The resolution may or may not, it may or may not be without foreign policy. It may be different from whatever we want to do.
So that is why, ma'am, you will be having the option of saying either a yes or a no. If it's very much against your foreign policy, you have the option to say no. If it's very close to your foreign policy or exactly like your foreign policy, you may go ahead and say yes. So there you have an option to say either a yes or no. And again, over the period of time, your research will let you know whether your country is going to say a yes or no. I'm telling you this because each and every agenda that has been chosen for this particular Pune Convention of IIMR has been conventional UN agendas for a long time, except for the DISEC agenda, which has been recently incorporated in 2010, right? So every agenda will give you voting records, your roll call records, your committee's documents, resolutions, your country's statements on those particular agenda. So there's a lot of research material available on the UN website itself. When you go through it, you will find out your country's policies as well. So at the end of it, there shouldn't be a problem in knowing whether your country is going to say either a yes or no. And that in turn will decide voting roll call, whether you say present or present in voting. Right? Any further queries on roll call? Yeah, one last.
After we say present and voting, we should get some time to think on it because we are having a strong relationship with another country. Like there was a topic of atomic proliferation of Iran. On that topic, India was neutral. So India had to think whether they have to take their decision or not because they have to see the relations with Iran. Iran is a very good friend of India, so they have to think about the relationship. So my question is that do you get the time to speak with Iran or something like that to save the relationship?
So precisely the reason why a roll call is taken before we start every session. So during the session, in the course of session, during your lunch, you have a lot of time to discuss your relations or discuss those individual points that you have with that particular country. So before every session, you get a chance to present your roll call again. So there, even if in the first session you have put your roll call as present, in the next session you can say present and voting if you are confirmed and you are absolutely sure about it. So you'll be marked upon in that way.
Means we get a personal space to talk with certain countries. Means we do not have to talk socially in front of all other nations.
Not necessarily. It goes in through various other modes like diplomatic chits, so you directly go and talk to the person outside the committee. Well, within the committee, one-to-one talks are not allowed. So everything happens according to procedure of either writing through diplomatic chits or you move out of the committee and have your bilateral discussions. So moving from roll call, the next that comes into procedure is called the setting the order of agenda. Now, why do we need to set the order of agenda? In this conference, in IIMR Pune, we will not be requiring this procedure very strictly because we have only one agenda in every committee. The moment we have more than one agenda in every committee, we have, let's say we have 2 or 3 agendas, it becomes a question which one to discuss first, right? Technically speaking, at the UN, there are more than 98 to 100 agendas for the entire General Assembly. That gets divided into various countries. So every committee has approximately 15 to 20 agendas to deal with. And the conference goes on for a month long, right? So at that time, it becomes extremely essential to decide which agenda should be taken up first. So therefore, when you have more than one agenda, what a particular delegate does is, he raises his or her placard and then goes ahead to propose a motion to change the order of the agenda. And in doing that, the person substantiates the reason as to why the agenda's order should be changed, why the second agenda should be taken up first, or in any other form, and then gives sufficient reasons for it, and the chairperson then asks whether this particular motion is acceptable to people, and thereby 2 people are taken for, 2 people are taken against to speak on that particular motion, and then it is voted upon. This is the basic. Now, before I go into explain more about motions, we need to know what are motions and what are points. These are the 2 things using which we'll be going through the entire committee's procedure. Now, a point, when I say that I raised a point in the committee, it is something which is very specific, very pinpointed, and deals with something to do individually, right? So I'll give you the examples of different points that we have. We'll be having a point of personal privilege, which is anything to do with your personal discomfort. The AC is too chilled, you raise a point of personal privilege to increase the temperature. If you have, let's say you want to go out and visit the restroom once, you raise the point of personal privilege, take the permission of the chairperson, and then you move out. So this is, and then let's say I'm speaking over here and you're unable to hear me out till the last point. So you raise a point of personal privilege on the ground of audibility, that you cannot hear me. So these are individual discomfort or personal discomfort that has been caused to you within the committee, and you can raise a point of personal privilege to sort it out. The next point available to you as a delegate is called the point of order. A point of order is raised only on two grounds. The first ground is grave procedural inaccuracy on the part of the executive board. When you know that this is the procedure and the executive board has erred in following the procedure, you can raise a point of order and point it out to the chairperson or the vice chairperson, saying that, Your Honourable Sir, you have committed so and so error in the procedure in this form, and this might be rectified. Right? So you have the power to tell the chairperson that your procedure, what you're following, is wrong, or what you have done over here is wrong, if you're absolutely sure about it. And the second reason why we use a point of order is a grave factual inaccuracy committed by a particular delegate, which goes unrecognized by the executive board. How does this happen? Let's say I'm representing Pakistan, and say that we have special ties with the United States of America because we share our borders and we have essential geopolitical relations between us. What is the mistake out here? Share our borders. Is that right? No. So this is a very stupid example, but at the same time, in the course of the conference, you will find out points which are coming almost on these lines, and certain members of the executive board, I'm not talking about this conference, but at a lot of places I've seen that it goes unnoticed. And if this is essential for the committee to take note of, you raise a point of order and point it out to the chairperson that whatever has been said by the delegate of Pakistan is wrong in this way, and this must be taken to the note of the committee and rectified. Something as small as a statistical change of information could be forgiven. Like, for example, India has a population of 1.27 billion. Somebody raises a point of order saying, no, it's 1.28 billion. So this is disputable again. This is open to different resources, different sites and different surveys. So, and this is something which keeps changing all the time, right? So this type of data may not be challenged, but something which is gravely inaccurate, factually inaccurate, you can point it out and get it to the notice of the chairperson. So this is called a point of order. Again, this is an individual point because you raise it and it is directly concerned with one particular member in the committee or one particular member of the executive board within the committee, and that is it. It does not affect the entire committee at large. And the third point, which is available to you, is called the point of parliamentary inquiry. Now, what is the point of parliamentary inquiry? If you are in the committee and suddenly you would like to clarify a point on the procedure that is being followed in the committee, what you do is you raise a point of parliamentary inquiry and you direct it to the chairperson or the vice chairperson and you get it clarified. It's to get your procedure clarified. It is suddenly you find yourself daydreaming within the committee and you want to know what has happened till now. You raise a point of parliamentary inquiry and get it clarified. That you don't say that I'm daydreaming, but you say that yes, the delegate of India raised a point of parliamentary inquiry on the grounds that it may be briefed on what is happening in the committee from this point of view, and the chairperson is under the obligation to explain to you. If I'm telling you very clearly that if on these grounds, if on point of personal privilege or point of order or point of parliamentary inquiry, you face any injustice in your committee, that you have been made fun of or a particular point has been discarded just out of the whim of the chairperson or something of that sort. Though I'm assuring you that it's not going to happen, but if it happens, you will take note of it, and during your next available break, or you may take leave of the committee and you can directly approach me on those grounds, right? Because any kind of misbehavior by the executive board to the delegates is absolutely not acceptable by the IML committee. So these are the 3 points that are available, and you can raise it at any point in time during the course of the conference. Talking with people, that's what I'm coming to right now. That out of these 3 points, the only point that can interrupt a speaker is the point of personal privilege, and that too again narrowed down only to audibility issue. If you're something like the temperature, or you have to visit the restroom or thing. These are things which can wait for a particular while, and you can address it later, like maybe after a minute. But something which is like audibility, this has to be addressed immediately, and therefore it has the power to interrupt the speaker. However, a point of order is again, this cannot interrupt the speaker. A point of parliamentary inquiry again cannot interrupt the speaker. After the speaker has completed their statement or speech, only then can you raise your placard, the chairperson recognizes you, and then you go ahead to put forth your point, either of order or of parliamentary inquiry. Right? Does that address your question, sir? Yes, sir.
In case we have an inquiry regarding to what a delegate has just said, do we directly ask the question, or we address it to the chairperson?
That is another place where you raise a point of personal privilege and request the chairperson to ask the delegate to repeat the statement. Any queries regarding the 3 points? Yes, sir.
Yeah, like what you just said, can you also raise the point of parliamentary inquiry and have the chairperson explain it, or will you just have to ask the delegate directly?
If it comes immediately after completion of the delegate speech, the delegate has to explain it. But if, for example, the delegate has spoken 5 speakers before and you want a clarification with respect to it, you either approach the executive board personally without any point and get it clarified, or you send in a diplomatic chit to the delegate with whom you want the clarification and get it done. Because we may not, according to our procedure, expect the executive board to explain the stance of every delegate, because that is not the work of the chairperson. The chairperson's mandate is something totally different. It's only to moderate the procedure within the committee. Okay? And the vice chairperson takes care of the substantive content regarding the content and matters of debate. Yes, ma'am.
But do these points like spoil the continuity of the procedure?
Don't they like interrupt the procedure a lot of times, like the flow of the committee? Well, that is the reason that only one point is allowed to interrupt the speaker, and the other points are allowed in order to get clarifications. I'll tell you, at the United Nations, the only point which is accepted is the point of order. Nothing else. Because as member states, if you point of personal privilege is again, which is not an actual point at the UN. What they do is, at the UN, such issues don't actually occur so frequently, and if it occurs, it's generally taken note by the chairperson immediately. Okay, so point of personal privilege does not come in there. Point of order again comes in only with respect to procedural and factual inaccuracy at the UN. Okay, and thirdly, point of parliamentary inquiry is again something which is not allowed over there. Why these points are incorporated in MUN conferences? So that it gives you a better way or a better formal way of handling the debate. So because these issues are going to arise when we are dealing with students, and when we are ourselves students, there are a lot of places where we can go wrong, where we can make mistakes, or where we can be out of procedure. So instead of a person randomly raising their hand and saying, hey, see, what you did is wrong, you do it with a point. Okay? Makes it slightly formal. Yes. It is the procedure of diplomatic chits is allowed all the time, just except for the resolution voting process. That is the only time when this is suspended. Apart from that, diplomatic chits are allowed to go round all the time. Yes.
During a point of parliamentary inquiry, does the chairperson address the inquiry then or during the
If it is an inquiry relating to something which requires the research of the chairperson, which is unavailable, then the chairperson might buy time from you and give it to you later. And if there is something which is immediate and on the spot, then the chairperson has to give it to you directly. The procedure is to have it directly addressed and not make it wait up to a long time unless and until there's a need for it. Yes, sir.
Regarding the point of order, what factual inaccuracies can be pointed out? Like say regarding the population, the geographic stance, and what about the foreign policies, relations with other countries in regard to the UN? Can those be pointed out at this point?
No, with respect to foreign policies, etc., these are very much subject to the relations of the country. And this is something like, if I'm not wrong, correct me if I'm wrong, that let's say Iran says that I'm very, Iran and let's say Israel, we have very good relations, which is in fact strained. Ideally it is strained. Relations between Iran and Israel is strained on the grounds of Palestine as a land. So if the delegate of Iran wishes to say that, you as a delegate of, let's say, Germany, as a third party altogether, cannot raise a point of order and say that that's factually inaccurate. Because it again depends on the delegate of Iran to say whatever he wants. According to his foreign policy, he is going wrong, which is again the duty of the chairperson to take note of. But as another delegate, you may not stop another country from expressing any stance it wants to. And the different ways in which you can address factual inaccuracy is something which is totally not exhaustive. So it could be anything. Again, even with respect to population, you can raise a point of order. Why? Because if somebody says that India's population is only 1 million, that is again great factual inaccuracy. But when we are talking in billions itself, in only like 0.27 and 0.28, that is something which could be waived off. And again, it depends on whether that statistics of population is going to have some real effect on the debate. Okay, when we are talking about, let's say, child soldiers in a particular region, if we are talking about child soldiers in Afghanistan, Afghanistan says that we don't have any child soldiers at all, while there are UN reports backing it up and saying that there are more than 1.5 lakhs child soldiers in Afghanistan. So this is again something which is factually inaccurate and we can point it out. But if Afghanistan says that yes, we agree that there are child soldiers and there are only 1.45 lakhs, and the UN report says 1.5 lakhs, this is something that could be waived off. Need not be pointed.
And what about countries' involvement in certain organizations? Say if the delegate from India says we are part of the OECD, which is not correct. Can that be raised?
That's absolutely raised. That is indeed. Yeah. Any further queries with respect to the points? Yes, sir.
Set a point of order is to point out factual inaccuracies. So, what references would you recommend that would be acceptable in the committee?
Is it fine if I address that question when we are discussing research? On how we go about the research and what would be considered as valid resources for the conference? Yeah. Yes, sir.
When should we say the point of order? I mean, when the delegate is speaking immediately there, or once the point has been stated, then we will see?
Once the delegate has completed its speech, elapsed the time, then you can raise the point of order.
Suppose we said the members send delegate checks to other delegates of other nations regarding any foreign policy, etc. So are the other delegates supposed to answer right at that time, or they are supposed to answer at any time without?
If it's happening between two chits.
Yeah.
That is between the countries, and the chair will not take cognizance of chits in the country. So that is between a particular delegate cannot say that I have sent a chit and you have to reply within this time. There is nothing of that sort. The country can take its own time to reply.
Okay. Yeah. So doesn't this procedure interrupt the procedure of United Nations, all the procedure that is going on? Doesn't this delegate chit procedure interrupt that procedure?
No, in fact it happens very smoothly because there are how we have our members from the secretariat present over here who are handling, let's say, the mic right now. You got the mic, right? So this is just what exactly happens when in terms of chits. In fact, in terms of chits, we are not even expecting you to be the speaker or anything, because you just write, you raise your hand and the chit, and somebody comes and takes it and circulates it around. So it does not exactly hamper the procedure between a delegate speaking and the chairperson listening and the committee listening to it. It happens at a very smooth level. That is taken care of.
Okay, so there is a certain person who takes that chit and gives it to another person, another delegate.
Yes. Yeah. So if that's really the query, and if all of you have a doubt with respect to that, then really you do not have to give the check to some other person. There are members of the secretariat who handle or who mobilize the process of circulating the diplomatic checks.
Is there a limit to the number of points that can be raised?
No, there is no limit of that. Any other queries with respect to points? Seeing none, we proceed to the next step. So what are the things that we have clarified just now? We are done with the roll call, we are done with the setting the order of the agenda, we are done with what are points, and now let's come to what is a motion. The moment we understand what is a motion, things get really quick and the procedure is mostly like more than 60 or 70% sorted. So what do you think according to you is a motion? Have you heard of this term motion? Have you used it anywhere before? Yes? Where have you used it? Give me a random inputs. In ISEC conferences, right? I got an input from that side. A model parliament again, right? And then? I'm sure we can change her country, change her allotment to something like IAEA. Yeah. Physics. The reply? Physics. Are there any other places where you have the term motion in terms of parliamentary procedure? Yeah, that's very right. The one who's given me an answer is model parliament. How have you used it there?
Whenever there was a motion for passing a bill or something, the speaker had to raise the point that this motion is passed, the motion is proposed, and then the members had to respond by vote of voice, and they got passed the motion.
Okay. And in ISEC meetings as well?
In ISEC, if this action has to be taken, or say, when someone has to be promoted, or there's something important information has to be shared, or some event is coming up, for that we take a motion, and it is seconded by someone. Like the narrator of the motion must have to confirm it with someone, tell it to someone, and if the other person also likes it, so then it is said it is seconded by, because another person who also seconds it, then there are two sort of speeches, the narrator and the second,
Right.
and then it is passed.
Okay. Haven't you people ever questioned what exactly is a motion? You have been asked to raise a motion, but what is a motion and why would I want to raise it? Absolutely. For me, it sounds something like a term of physics, and I don't want to use it in parliamentary procedure. Why? Why a motion? What is the word motion? Yes, ma'am.
When you're looking at a problem or when you're trying to solve a problem and you're trying to find a solution to a problem. You're trying to take some votes and trying to resolve something, and by taking the majority.
Exactly. The point, the gist of this point is that there are people involved. That it's not about the individual, but about the entire committee, about the United Nations. So, what exactly is a motion in its core term is when you, as an individual, would like to suggest something, would like to dedicate the time of the committee to do a particular thing, and you want the entire committee's support or consensus on that particular thing, or on the consensus on the point that you are going to allocate time for this matter, what you do is you raise a motion. And every motion comes from the word that you move for something. Move, motion, right? So when you are raising a motion, you frame it in the point that the delegate of India moves to do this, right? And that becomes a motion. So a motion is nothing but when in this committee, when in this hall of, like, let's say 200 people sitting over here, one person wants to say that, okay, we are enough with this random procedure discussion, let's have some people dancing on the floor. So it might be your personal opinion that you want people dancing over here, but may not be the others. So what we are essentially trying to do is that out of the 2 hours that we have allocated in this particular hall, you want to take away 15 minutes of the committee's time in some people dancing out here, which may not be the idea of all the others, or which may be the idea of all the others. So what you do is you raise a motion and you let the entire committee decide whether you want it or not. So at the end of the day, what you do is, this is the exercise of the power of democracy. You raise a motion and you let's see what the entire committee says. And if the committee goes up for it, then you dedicate the committee's time for that particular work that you have. So everything that happens within the committee it happens through a motion. Yes, ma'am.
Is it, suppose not everyone who wants to,
Yes.
but you think it's important, so can you give a reason so that no people will want?
Absolutely. After you suggest every motion, you are allowed to explain the motion if the procedure requires. Okay, like for example, setting the order of the agenda. What we do is we raise a motion. That honorable delegate of Burkina Faso would like to raise a motion to change the order of the agenda. And everyone will be like, you small country out there, why do you want to change the order of the agenda? Why would we want to listen to you? I'm USA, I won't listen to you. So what you do is, you're saying fine, you might be USA, but there are 10 other countries sitting over here who are not USA and who belong to the third world, and we third world, this is the reason that why we should take up the topic of poverty before we take up nuclear disarmament. Because for us, hunger is more important than you discussing your weapons, right? So if you can convince the entire committee on those grounds, the committee will go ahead and say yes. Get it? Yeah.
Is there any kind of percentage for suppose I move a motion?
Support.
Yeah, for support, is there a certain percentage or it has to be the entire committee that agrees?
No, it does not have to be the entire committee that agrees. What do you do between your friends if you want to go for a movie? You have 10 people, 9 saying yes. What do? You take a majority vote, right?
Yes.
It's like, listen, we don't bother. If we have a majority out here, we go.
Okay, so there's no minimum, has to
There
be
are
1/4.
certain points. There are certain very important points on which we need at least 2/3 majority. That is 66.66% of vote within the committee. And only that much vote can pass a particular topic or a particular resolution. And there are certain topics which are marked by the United Nations that these require only a simple majority. That is 50% vote plus 1. That means if we are 50 members sitting over here, 25 plus 1, that is 26 can pass this. Right? Yes, ma'am.
I was going to ask you the same thing. If exactly half the council votes for a motion, then you explained it, just 1%.
And what happens if there are only 25 and we don't have 26? Exactly 50-50 division? Very unfortunately, the motion fails. Yeah, it is that technical. Any further queries with respect to a motion? Is a point of motion clear? Yes, ma'am.
How would you raise a point of motion? Or why would somebody raise a point of a motion? Like, is it more towards just your country's point of view, or is it something that is, your country and your allies, and it's something that is, good for most people?
A motion essentially is a part of the procedure, and the procedure takes a certain flow. It has a certain order in which it comes. So how we said that first we start with the roll call, then we move to setting the order of the agenda, then we'll move on to debate. So it is a flow in which we are going. And to address those particular elements within the flow of the procedure, you have to raise a motion to have them within the committee. No person can directly move into setting the order of the agenda without raising a motion for it. At the same time, a motion is invited by the chairperson. The chairperson, when he or she feels that this is the right time to entertain motions for a particular thing, the chairperson will invite motions for it, saying that honorable delegates, now since sufficient debate has happened on this particular topic, we would like to invite a motion for XYZ reason. And then it gives an indirect hint to the delegate that yes, this is the time to raise a motion now, and the delegate raises the motion, and then it is again put forward to all the other people present in the committee, and it gets voted upon. So the chairperson, if you are unaware that when to raise a motion, the chairperson is sitting over there to guide you on when there might be at the right time to bring up a particular motion. Apart from that, raising a motion is totally the right of a delegate. A chairperson on its own can never pass or raise a motion. So what the chair will always do is he'll invite the motion to come forward. Yeah. Yeah.
So does that mean that the motion has to be related to the topic being discussed or debated on?
Yes, absolutely. Because anything apart from the topic will not be taken up as a motion. What we are doing is we are following procedure in order to address the particular topic. So any motion that you bring forth in the committee has to be related to the topic.
And can you give an example as to how to exactly suggest a motion?
Yes, there are. Actually, a motion could be brought forth for any reason relating to the agenda. And while we are discussing procedure further, I'll give you examples of different motions that we can raise for different things to be done in the committee. Is that fine? Yeah. Any further queries? Seeing none. So now, since you have understood what are... Okay, sir, sorry.
Apart from the committee getting, like you said, 2/3 of the committee has to be convinced about the motion being actually raised, are there any exceptions associated with it?
I did not say that or for any and all motions, that 2/3 vote is only for a particular voting on a particular resolution. Okay, and that resolution being classified within the UN to be passed only after 2/3 majority. And any other motion within the committee which is just a part of the procedure and does not deal with the substantive content, does not deal with the agenda as such, is passed without a 2/3 majority. That means a normal simple majority is necessary for it, right? Something like, let's say setting the order of the agenda. This requires a simple majority, 50 plus 1. Then something to do with, let's say somebody wants to make the committee move into something which is called a moderated caucus. I'll discuss that later. So that is something which is not relating directly to the agenda, but it forms a part of the procedure. So these are called procedural voting. And these procedural votes need only a simple majority. That's it. 50% vote plus 1. That's it. Yes? Yeah. Go ahead. You want the entire committee to dedicate the committee's time for a particular thing. Yes.
In case you're trying to suggest something and you're trying to move a motion and it's rejected at first, are we allowed to discuss during the breaks? Are we allowed to discuss and again move the motion?
Absolutely. Delegates can move a particular motion as many times as they want until it passes. Yeah. Moving forward, now since you understood what exactly is a motion, I'll tell you what we can do with these motions, right? So now, till now, we are just made the groundwork for the debate. Now after this, the actual debate takes place. Once you have set the order of the agenda, you will move on to something which is called a formal debate. The UN debate that takes place moves in through two directions, or there are two mediums of the debate happening. One which is called a formal debate and another which is called the informal debate, right? We'll first deal with something which is called the formal debate. Formal debate, why is it called formal? Because there's a lot of procedure, protocol that is involved with that particular type of debate. Along with that, the chairperson and the vice chairperson, they address the committee within the course of time and moderate the discussion, so that involves another formality. And the third thing is that anything and everything that you say during the course of the formal debate forms your official stance and policy of your country. If you say a particular statement in the informal debate, informal, okay, and then you contradict it in the formal debate, what stands out is what you have said in the formal debate and not what you have said in the informal debate. Got it? So that is why it is called a formal debate. It is formed, it becomes an official record of the UN. You will not often find details of informal debate within the UN, but about formal debate, you will always find the records on the UN website. Okay? The very base work of formal debate is something which is called a general speakers list. Now the general speakers list is a list of speakers who are going to come up, present their country's official views on that particular agenda. Okay? Now, this general speakers list is also raised through a motion. Can anybody try over here to raise a motion for a general speakers list in any way that you want? Yeah.
Motion to open general speakers list?
Yes, sir. That motion is completely in order. So that is how you raise a motion for the general speakers list. That is it. There is nothing. There is no procedure, formality, protocol involved in it. You heard that? It is, he said, a motion to open the general speakers list. Now, this is how you have to suggest a motion. Anytime you want to do anything, just say that the delegate of so-and-so country would like to move in for a motion for this reason. To open a general speakers list, to break for lunch, or to do whatever. Okay? You just say in very basic terms that this is a motion to do this, and the committee then votes upon it. Right? Now, a motion for a general speakers list, why is it so important? Is because until and unless the general speakers list is open, anything and everything relating to the agenda cannot happen. You need to have the general speakers list as a backdrop for it to take place. Okay? Let's say, well, forgive me for this analogy, but what a whiteboard is for a presentation, for a projector to project upon, exactly the same way the general speakers list becomes for the United Nations and the procedure to happen in the committee. You need to have it as the base. Until you have it that as the base, you cannot project any views in your country or in your committee, right? So the general speakers list is something in which you come forward, you address the entire world at large, and thereby put forth your country's views on your agenda. By now, I'm sure that every person present over here will have a committee, country, and an agenda to discuss upon, right? So when you come to the general speaker, when you come and enroll yourself on the general speakers list, what you do is you present a speech which in very brief terms gives an opinion about what your country will do in that particular agenda, right? Now, in the general speakers list, once the motion is put forth, it gets voted upon, and the general speakers list is then released open. How you enroll yourself on the GSL is, for the first round, the chairperson says that delegates who wish to enroll themselves on the general speakers list may raise your placard. So what you do is you raise your placard if you wish to speak on the general speakers list. Let's say 50 people over here have raised their hand, and I take down 10 or 12 names arbitrarily and put it on the screen. So these people in the list that I have made are going to come in that order and present their speeches, right? And after, like when we are almost done with like the 10th speaker, 2 more speakers are remaining, the chairperson can again open another round of inviting speakers for the general speakers list, or during the course of general speakers list, you can send in those diplomatic checks to the chairperson and ask him to incorporate you to the general speakers list. Is that clear? Any query with respect to how the GSL enrollment has to be done? Yes.
So it's not compulsory for the delegate to speak on each and every topic. He can just say whether he wants to speak by enrolling himself in the general speakers list. So it's not compulsory for each and every country to express their views about every problem, right? So
essentially what we're dealing with is one big problem. And what we do in the general speakers list is talk about that one big problem as the member of that country. Okay? You are not, there is no obligation on any country to come and speak. If I, as a delegate of some country, decide that I do not want to speak in this committee at all, I have the right to do so. And no chairperson or no delegate can force me to present my views. Okay? And if a chairperson asks you that you, for example, you particular delegate, you have not been speaking in the committee at all, please come here and give your views. You can happily go and say that I do not want to speak. Absolutely, you can do that, because at the end of the day you are a member state and you have the right whether to say, speak anything or not. So that I think takes care of the question.
what is the advantage of being in the GSL? Is it because anyway, even when the committee is sitting, you get to express your views on any topic or any agenda. So what is the specific advantage of going up there and officially like speaking out?
May I know how exactly while the committee is seated you get to get a chance to
like suppose when an agenda is being discussed, so you raise your placard and you put your point forward. So you do that. But so then, if you're already doing that, what is the advantage of enrolling yourself for the GSL?
Essentially, what you said just now, that you raise an agenda and you start speaking, that's not how it happens.
Okay.
The only method of debate is the general speakers list, primarily. And you get to present your views in front of all the 50 people sitting in the committee. Okay? And that is how, the advantage, if you ask me very specifically, is to get yourself heard. To make an impact in the committee, to make the countries present over here believe in what you say. Okay?
So what about the countries that do not enroll for the GSL? How do they put their point?
That's their wish. If they do not want to enroll themselves in the GSL, then they can go ahead in terms of informal debate to put forth. However, do remember that when the United Nations finally publishes all the statements, it's going to publish only the ones put forth in the formal debate. And therefore, at the end of it, your country will not have its name or its statement put forth as the formal debate. It will happen in the informal debate and it will not get officially noticed by the press.
Alright.
Yeah.
So basically the GSL is like the speech of your opinion on the topic.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you want to know the format of the speech that has to be done, like that has to be followed, or if you want it to be followed, then I will give it to you, right? Yeah.
Does the motion always have to be raised for the GSL to start, or can the chairperson execute?
There is, see, any and all motion has to come from the delegate, number one. Secondly, a motion for the GSL once opened remains open till the end. Okay, so you don't have to raise a motion to open the general speakers list again and again. The moment the number of speakers on the GSL elapses, it comes to an end, then the entire discussion on the agenda cannot happen any further, right? So there cannot be any informal debate, there can be no resolution, nothing. You directly go on to voting if you have a resolution. If you don't have a resolution, the committee comes to an end. So if by the mistake of your chairperson or if the committee is so uninterested in the debate, if nobody wishes to enroll themselves on the GSL, at the end of even 20 minutes, after 10 speakers have spoken, the GSL can come to an end and the committee is down there. Yeah.
How much time will each delegate get?
On an average, every MUN has around 90 seconds for every delegate to speak. Yeah. Yes. Yes, ma'am. I am aware that this only 90 seconds is a very, very short time. But it again, in order to let every person speak in the committee, in the general speakers list, we are allotted this much time. And do know one thing, the general speakers list is open throughout. So once you are done speaking on the GSL, you can enroll yourself again. The moment you have come here, given your speech, gone back, you can write to the chairperson that I want to enroll myself on the GSL and give your name once again. So 90 again, in that way. Yeah. So general speakers list in that way becomes the base of the debate, and on this backdrop of the general speakers list, you put forth your other motions, which are called the informal debate. Now within informal debate, we have two different types of motions. One is called the moderated caucus, and the other is called the unmoderated caucus. Out of general, common knowledge of English, what do you think that what is a moderated caucus and what is an unmoderated caucus? Yes?
I think that a moderated caucus will be one which is moderated by the chairperson and the vice chairperson, and an unmoderated caucus will be one where there's no where the chairman is just present. He's not.
Chairman is not present. Well, that is absolutely correct. Though the chairman not being present is not really the part, but the chairperson, even if he is present, he does not moderate the debate. In case of a moderated caucus, it's an informal debate which is handled by the chairperson. In terms of unmoderated caucus, it's an informal debate which is not handled by the chairperson. So in that case, when anything is not handled by the chairperson, the delegates have the right to free speech and right to free movement within the committee and talk to each other directly, interpersonally, and get things sorted. Right? That is the unmoderated caucus. And in the moderated caucus, it is a scope of further discussion on basics of the agenda. Now, I'll tell you something, that if you're talking about weapons disarmament over here in this room, do you think that every particular policy we take up for nuclear disarmament will sort out the solutions for small arms, for biological weapons, for chemical weapons, for any other type of warfare? Do you think one set of policy is going to take care of everything? I mean, you know, common answer from you. No, right? So in that case, every topic needs our attention. Every type of disarmament needs our attention. And therefore, in that huge arena of weapons disarmament, we talk about nuclear disarmament, we talk about, let's say, biological weapons, we talk about chemical warfare, we talk about small arms disarmament, etc. So how do we talk about these things? What you do is, as a member state, you come on the GSL and speak on all of these in a very brief, encapsulating everything that contains in weapons disarmament. And during the course of informal debate, you raise them as individual motions. Okay, so you break this entire big agenda into different small motions and you talk and discuss more about it. So each of these small agendas becomes a moderated caucus. Is that clear? Why is it a moderated caucus? Because it is moderated by the chairperson. And why is it an informal debate? Because it does not have protocol involved. And secondly, it does not have the formality of statements that is involved in the general speakers list. In the general speakers list, every speech is taken note of and gets published as an official statement, while in the moderated caucus, it becomes all informal debate, and therefore the formality of the statement is not there. So therefore, it is an informal debate. Now, how exactly do you propose a motion for a moderated caucus? Again, does anybody want to try out here? Raise your hand. Alright.
A motion for a moderated caucus also.
It is a moderated caucus. CAUCUS. And fine. So you want to dedicate the time for moderated caucus. For how long?
1 minute.
For 1 minute per person. Per person, okay. And how many people do you want to speak? Like, you have a basic idea how many people in average? 10 people. So how much time does that make it? 10 minutes. So precisely, when you are suggesting a moderated caucus, what you do is, you suggest a topic on which you want the moderated caucus to take place. You also suggest the total time of the committee that you want to dedicate. And you also suggest an individual speaker's time. Okay? In case of GSL and all the other motions, these motions do not have a time limit to it. A GSL, when it's open, is open until it's closed, finally. But in case of moderated caucus, these are short motions. So in that case, you raise a motion and you specify its upper and lower limits. That it is totally for 10 minutes and individual speaker's time is, let's say, 45 seconds, or it's going to be 1 minute. So the chairperson then puts that motion for vote, and if it receives a majority, it gets voted upon and it gets passed, and thereby we have that particular moderated caucus. Yes.
Why would you motion for a moderated caucus? Because when you have the GSL, you have more time and you can go back on the list and come back, and then you have more time. This one is going to be a short motion. Is there a reason why you would call for a moderated caucus?
Yes, ma'am. The reason why we go into informal debating is because we want, or the entire committee would like to dedicate more of its time into individual sub-agendas present within the huge agenda. What happens in the GSL is every country comes in and gives in a very vague, broad statement. And the moment we move into moderated caucus, it becomes a pinpointed discussion on that particular sub-agenda. So now if we are in a moderated caucus of nuclear disarmament, all we are talking about is nuclear weapons and policies that deal with nuclear disarmament. And not to deal with biological weapons, chemical warfare, etc. None of these come into picture. Right? But in the GSL, I'm giving you a very wide and vague idea about what is disarmament and how it should be handled. So this is the difference, or this is the advantage of having a debate in the moderated caucus, because we are then able to discuss the policies individually. That. Any further queries? Yeah.
In the moderated
Yeah.
In the moderated caucus, if I say I want 10 members, who will choose those 10 members, or where do those 10 members come?
You do not exactly specify 10 members, you give an upper limit of the total time, and then you specify individual speaking time. And then it is then further selected by the chairperson. The chairperson selects the number of speakers, or if needed, the chairperson may extend the moderated caucus. Yes.
The informal debate, the contents of the informal debate are not recorded or taken into consideration. Why have the informal debate?
Informal debate is taken into consideration in a very different and peculiar way, which I'm going to come to immediately after discussing moderated caucus. Yes.
So the moderated caucus takes place after the...
No. The moderated caucus takes place within the GSL. So the moment you suggest a moderated caucus, the GSL is suspended for a while. You enter into a moderated caucus for 10 minutes. Immediately after the 10 minutes of the moderated caucus, the GSL resumes.
As many required?
As many caucuses as you require. On as many topics as the committee decides to do. You propose a topic, it gets voted upon. If the committee likes it, you go for a moderated caucus, discuss that topic, come out of it, and then back in the GSL.
So any country can take part in the caucus?
Absolutely. And there is no formality involved. Yeah.
So this is specification on which country?
make sure the caucus speaks?
Any country can come up and speak either for the caucus or against the caucus.
Can a motion for a moderate caucus interrupt a GSL when a speaker is speaking? Can it interrupt? Can the motion for a moderate
Interrupt a
caucus interrupt?
speaker on the general speaker's
Yeah.
list? Not at all. Because a motion in itself is first invited by the chairperson. And until unless it is invited by the chairperson, you cannot suggest a motion. Right? So, when the chairperson suggests or invites the motion, only then can you bring it forward. And that does not hamper the debate of the GSL.
Can the, suppose a person says moderated caucus for 10 minutes, can it last for less than 10 minutes if not enough people want to speak on the topic?
Absolutely, it can. If there are no further speakers on the topic, then the moderate caucus is brought to Yes.
If I motion for moderate caucus for say 15 minutes and speaker time 1 minute, but I want to include questions in it, can I put a sub-clause in the motion for like 30 seconds for questions?
No, there is no particular provision of questions within a moderate caucus. Questions are only dealt with in the general speakers list. And when we are discussing speeches, we'll come to that. Yeah. Any queries? Yeah.
Suppose that number of speaker is fixed by the chairperson, is told by the member, and then chairperson.
The number of speakers can never be fixed by the member. What the member can do is give the total time and give the individual speakers time.
Okay, so how is it fixed that who is gonna speak at which time? Means first USA, suppose USA is fixed to speak, then how is it going to say? How is it going to raise its voice over there? Should USA raise their hand over there, or is it fixed? How?
It happens in exactly the way it is happening right now. You raise your hand, and let's say we have 3 members raising their hand, and what I'm doing over here right now is giving equal opportunity to these 3 sides. Okay, so it is again the discretion of the chairperson, and it happens in the exact fashion that is happening right now. You raise your placard, and then you get selected in an arbitrary fashion. Yeah.
But only the countries which are selected for speaking over there are just supposed to raise their hands, not other countries.
No. See, all of you never know that who is going to get selected. So you're raising your hand in the hope of getting selected, and thereby when you get selected, you give your put forth your stance, question, speech, etc. So it's in the same way in the moderate caucus. The countries are not aware if they are going to get the chance or not. They raise their hand to speak, and if selected, they get to speak.
Okay, so not before raising the hand they are selected. They are selected after raising the hand.
After raising the hand. And whichever country suggests the motion for a moderate caucus, that country by default becomes the first speaker of the moderate caucus. Okay? Any queries further? Yes, ma'am. All the points are available during a moderate caucus. All of them. Yeah. Yes. Difference between both of them? Yes, that will be understanding when we are discussing unmoderated caucus in a further detail. That unmoderated caucus is essentially to collate all the solutions together that we get during GSL, during moderate caucus, etc. And there, in unmoderated caucus, none of your statements are recorded, or none of your statements are taken note of by the members of the secretariat or the executive board. So in that way, it's a very, very informal discussion between you, like a bunch of friends sitting together and talking about something. It happens in the exact same fashion. Only the amount of diplomatic courtesy increases. Yes.
What if the person while speaking goes over the time limit?
Goes over the time limit, the chairperson may request the the delegate to conclude or give the closing remarks. Yes.
What is the upper time limit for the entire moderated caucus?
There is no such upper time limit. You can even suggest a moderate caucus for 1 hour. But if the time does not provide for it, the chairperson might request you to rephrase it and make it lesser time.
And it is the authority of the chairperson to decide the time?
Essentially, it is the authority of the delegate, but since we are posed with time constraint right from the beginning, that instead of having a 1 month long conference, we are having a 2 days conference. So there itself, the chairperson has to make certain diversion from the procedure and ask the delegates to restrain their time. Yes, sir.
if a person finishes before the time limit, can he give his leftover time to someone or no?
In moderated caucus, no. In the general speakers list, yes. Any further questions? Seeing none? Okay, one last one.
In the general speakers list, if somebody gives you their extra time which they are not using, and you don't have enough to say, so can you give that? You will have extra time. Can you give that to somebody?
Somebody give your time to another person, and that person can give you. No, not it's only one time transferable. That's it. So, is the moderated caucus clear that why we need to have it? Because we have to discuss individual subtopics in detail, and the policies come out of it are taken note by the country sitting over there. And what exactly is a caucus? Like a very close synonym of the caucus is called lobbying, right? Caucusing and lobbying are very two similar terms, and it is essentially in order to see that which countries are in favor and which countries are against. So when the moderated caucus has countries speaking in it, you get to know that on that particular subtopic whether those countries are in favor or against you. So there you kind of judge, or you kind of get to know who are your friends and who are your not so good friends. I won't say enemies, but not so good friends. So that is a way of judging and lobbying out there to find out. The primary step of lobbying is to find out that who is your friend and who is not. Okay? And in that case, in the unmoderated caucus, when you get to have your direct interpersonal conversations, there you can go to your friends, form your blocks, and try to form the resolution together. Now, in an unmoderated caucus, what happens is you raise a motion again, and you directly state the total time for the unmoderated caucus. You are not in an obligation to let the chairperson know why you want an unmoderated caucus. If the entire committee votes for it, you get into the motion. So I'll give you an example. The delegate of India would like to raise a motion for an unmoderated caucus for a total period of 15 minutes. That's it. And then it gets voted upon and the committee moves into an unmoderated caucus. In an unmoderated caucus, what I will do is, if I'm India and I have come to know that there are 15 countries over here whose policies are matching my country's policies, and how do I get to know that? Through the moderated caucus. That this is how it is happening. So I try to approach those 15 countries and form a group over there of these 15 countries and me, and try to bring our policies together so that we form a document. This document, this initial document, is called a working paper. What is a working paper is, since there are a lot of moderated caucuses happening, general speakers list, the speakers are speaking, so what you do is, there are too many solutions that are coming up, okay, or there are too many points that are coming up in the committee. So what you do is, you make a working paper and you get all of those solutions together, okay. So let's say that we are having a very, me and the 5 people sitting over here, we are having a conversation on what are the movies that are going to release in 2013. And we get into the details of, let's say, the English movies, the Hindi movies, etc. English, Hindi, Marathi, Telugu, Malayalam, 5 languages, right? And we decide that fine, these are the movies that are being released under each of these languages. And when do we go for it? These are the release dates, and let's save money in this way for this movie. This way for this movie, should we have popcorn for this movie or not? Everything is decided right at the beginning so that we have a very good future planned ahead for the entire year on what movies to watch. So what we do is, the moment we are done with discussing the plans and ideas for all the English movies together, we decide that, okay, let's put them down into a particular paper and keep it aside for the time being. So what we do is, we list the solutions down that have come up for the English movie and we keep it as a paper. In the same way, once a lot of discussion has happened on a particular sub-agenda, or a couple of or 3 or 4 sub-agendas together, you come together and form a working paper, write down the solutions, keep it aside for your future reference. Okay? In the similar fashion, again you have around 2 to 3 more sub-agenda, moderated caucuses, more general speakers, the speaker speaking, etc. You come together in an unmoderated caucus, write a working paper with your friends out there, with your allies out there, and make a working paper and keep it aside. In this way, after your discussions have taken place over the 2 days' time, you get to know what you have done during those 2 days. A working paper gives you direction as to what the committee has been doing all this time. Okay? And this is the entire reason that you why you write a particular working paper. Okay? And a working paper is never voted upon because it just gives you the direction as to where the committee is proceeding or what the committee is heading towards. Is that clear? Any query with respect to what is a working paper? So once we have had our discussions on individual movies or individual languages and the movies underneath within that, what we do is that fine, we have discussed all these 5 languages, all the movies, all our plans together. So let's form it in a file and keep it for a record for the rest of the year. Any idea as to what we are dealing with respect to an MUN over here? Did I hear something out there? Absolutely, a resolution. After you have discussed everything down in various sub-agendas, various solutions have come up, you have written your working papers, right? You come together, collate them all together, and that is nothing but your resolution. So can you relate to it now, how this happens? General speakers list, broad, vague idea. Moderated caucus, pinpointed solutions. Unmoderated caucus, making friends in terms of diplomacy and allies. And then writing the solutions together in a working paper. At the end of the day, collect all the working papers together, draft a resolution. This is nothing but your entire MUN procedure. This is all that we have to do for that one resolution coming together. All the discussion happens, and after the resolution, once we are close to the resolution, we go through further discussions on the viabilities and feasibilities of the resolution, etc. And these are the things which I cannot state over here, but you, when you are in the committee assuming the position as a delegate of your country, you will get to know and realize and feel it at that time itself. So you yourself will be bargaining for the best negotiations that you can get done for your own country. You get it? Yes, ma'am.
So a resolution would be something that you're trying to work towards. A resolution would be something, say you have a topic, interdisciplinary engineering for sustainable development, and so you're trying to make a resolution. So what would a resolution look like, for an example?
For an example, how would it look like? Okay. Do we have the laptop connected out here? Members of the secretariat, we have the laptop connected. As soon as this gets connected, I might show you actual copy of the resolution, but in very basic terms, a resolution contains 3 parts. The first part of the resolution is the heading. Okay? Let's come to something which you might relate to. When you write an essay on a particular topic, how do you deal with it in school? What is the first thing that you do? Introduction, right? So, but before that, don't you write the heading of the essay on what you're writing it on? So in the similar way, in an MUN, you first write the topic, that is the agenda. Along with that, your committee's name, etc. There are some other, by a lot of numbers that come in. So what happens is you first write the heading, and then what did you see? What do you write about? Introduction, right? What do you write in the introduction? Okay, let me give you a topic. Think about this. That poverty. How you are going to deal with this? What are you going to write in the introduction? What is poverty? Problem. A statement of all the problems. Yeah. Anything else? Countries affected by poverty, that means take special note of those countries, okay. Then? What exactly, who classifies poor, taking note of? Causes. So essentially you are making a groundwork for a set of ideas or solutions that you are going to put, right? And in a resolution, this part exists, and this is called the preamble. The preambulatory part deals with every statement in the preambulatory clauses, deal with one particular description of the problem. Okay? It can talk about past UN resolutions, different stances taken by the countries. Let's say Israel is being naughty, so you write that taking note of Israel's inaction in this particular area, or things like that. Things which need to be addressed before you come to the solution aspect, right? And then, after you have taken a lot of time in writing the entire preamble down, in fact, when you're talking about preamble, you can relate to the Constitution of India as closely to that. Then it first has the preamble that describes what India is, and then goes ahead to say that India has these laws, or should have, or should be followed. So, ideally, the preambulatory part deals with the description of the problem. That's it. Okay? And then, the operative clauses are the ones which talk about the solution. The term itself is self-defining, that it is operative. Operative clauses, the ones which need to be put into enforcement, the ones which need to be put into operation. Right? So the operative clauses are the ones which deal with the solution. And therefore, they are numbered. The preambulatory clauses are not numbered. They are individual statements. Okay? And then the operative clauses are the ones which are numbered 1, 2, 3, 4, and they have sub-clauses. And they talk about the solutions specifically. Is that clear? This is all that is there. Nothing. And where do you get these solutions from? From people who support, definitely. And how do you get the people support? Okay. And how do you get into the unmoderated caucus? And motion. Motion for? Okay, and before that the groundwork is done in moderated caucus. And how do you get into the moderated caucus? GSL. And before the GSL, what do you do? And what is the first thing that you do in the company? That's it. So that's all that you do right from the beginning till the end of an MBA. Okay? Your goal is to come towards a solution, but however, I'll warn you of people who will tell you that if you don't pass a resolution in the committee, your committee fails. But that's not true. If I have to choose between passing a resolution and my country's policy, I'll choose policy over resolution. Because that is what, as an MUNer, or as a representative of a country, your goal is not to take care or not to worry, or not just to worry about the agenda, but to worry about your country's policy and depiction of your country's policy, the representation of it at that level. Do not worry about people who say that a resolution, if you are not passed, firstly concentrate on your policy. Right? Any queries with respect to unmoderated caucuses or the last part of the resolution or anything? If you want a format of the resolution, these are the things which are very technical things, and if we discuss it right now, you won't remember it at the day of the conference or at the moment while you're out. What we'll do is we'll provide a template of the resolution, format of the resolution in your committee itself, and you can take note of it, you can refer to it while you're making the resolution. Right? And very briefly, how much time do I have? Okay, I have 1 minute. My watch says. I'll borrow 5 minutes of your time, right? Quickly, I'll tell you what are the essentials that you might cover in your speech, right? In your speech, again, similar fashion, you first give your introduction as to what is the problem. So first, a description of the problem. Secondly, you come to what the United Nations has done in this field. Thirdly, you talk how this particular problem affects your country. Even if a lot of people who might be in the UNHRC, they're talking about the Syrian Arab Republic. So a country as far as, let's say, Honduras will say that I'm in the Latin American region and I don't have any relation to Syrian Arab Republic whatsoever. So how does it affect it? How, anybody can answer this? Like, why does the problem happening in Syria affect a country as far as Honduras or any other country? Yeah.
Considering that, suppose US is supporting Syria about something, and it's diverting its own resources for this problem in Syria.
Yeah.
And considering that it is also supporting Honduras.
So resource allocation. Yeah. Same thing. And that's it. don't you think that, yes ma'am?
How about like when they have sanctions and things like that?
Exactly. Sanctions is another thing, but there is a common interest that like countries like Honduras and these, they are not normally involved in the process of deciding sanctions or anything, especially when we are talking about these like the non-decisive organs of the UN, like this General Assembly, COSOC. These are the ones which don't take a particular decision on sanctions. Security Council is the only council which takes decisions on these aspects. So, very widely stating, if you are a delegate of Honduras in that committee and we are talking about Syria, technically speaking, nobody should take note of it because you are Honduras and you are fully connected with Syria. But why is it important at the UN that every country hears every other country? Because of one common problem over here, which talks about international law, which talks about human rights. So when we are talking about the human right, the countries, the borders falling, and we are talking about human beings in some other country. So here, me as Honduras, has every right to say or guide Syria or guide any other country with respect to the situation. So that's how you make your presence felt in the committee and giving valid legitimate reasons as to resource allocation, etc. There could be a lot of other individual reasons that the countries might have, but there could be one common ground, that is the problem itself. That tomorrow if it happens in my country, it could be my problem as well. So in that way, in that reason, in that groundwork, even I have a right to address that particular. So the third essential part of your speech is how does it affect your country, and this is the place where you make the maximum impact. Yes, ma'am. Exactly. So it does not necessarily have to. So in that case, everybody will have something to say essentially about the agenda, right? And then yes. Absolutely. In fact, I'll tell you, who are the members of the DISEC over here? Okay. Have you heard of the country Trinidad and Tobago? Yeah. Do you know where it is? West Indies? Like, if you're given with this miniature map of the world, can you point it out and say it's here? It's that small a country. But with respect to the agenda that you are dealing with in DISEC, that small tiny nation out there was the one to first bring it to the United Nations. So any country in this world can sponsor a resolution and get it passed. Okay? So in that case, any country can pass a resolution on any topic that comes forth before the UN. Any further question? Yeah.
Basically, in every committee, each country has equal power over the agenda.
Absolutely. Except for the Security Council, wherein there are veto powers assigned to 5 permanent member states. The 5 permanent member states are the France, Russia, US, UK, China. These countries are considered to be the founding members of the United Nations, and that's why they want this special authority in the Security Council. So whenever a resolution comes up for voting in the Security Council, what happens is that if one of these 5 permanent members says no, the vote does it. Like, the voting is kind of nullified because the resolution stands cancelled itself. So in that case, the other members have to convince the 5 permanent members to vote for it.
If we are talking about why everyone should be given chance to speak over there, or they should be taken care of, then there is a problem of global recession, economic problems in the whole world. The problems are common in every country, so every country should be given chance to speak over there, so that problems of their country should be sorted out.
Absolutely.
So the problem is global recession, which is common to every country now.
Right.
So they should get a chance. That is why it is common in every country.
So no, my explanation was with respect to issues where prima facie you might not see any relation. You get it? Like on the face of it, your country might not see to be related to the problem. In case of those common issues like the ones which we are facing in the 4 committees like DISEC, ECOFIN, SOCOM and SPECPOL, not even SPECPOL, essentially the first 3 committees, International Drug Control, these are wide topics in which every country has a say. But when we are talking about some specific country-related agenda like Syria and Arab Republic, Israel, Palestine, so then how to make yourself heard in a country? That's what we do.
Over there also, there are some MNCs and etc. The global market, we can say, where companies of certain countries are going at that Palestine or Israel. Then problems of these regions can also affect these companies now.
Right.
So economy of this certain country which is investing in Israel and Palestine can be affected.
Right.
That is why each and every country should be given given the chance to speak over there.
Absolutely. So the chance is given, chance is definitely given. But to make yourself more prominent within the committee, what you can do. That was my essential point. Yeah. Any further questions? And the last part of your speech is the conclusions that you can give very briefly. Conclusions are discussed in much more detail when we are dealing with the unmodeled caucuses, etc., the modeled caucuses. These are the ones where you discuss the solutions in detail. However, if you want to put them in your GSL, you can put it up to a certain extent. That's all.
In a caucus, the speech format is
In the moderate caucus, there is no particular format. In the GSL also, to be very honest, there is no format. This is to ease out your 90 seconds. If you have 15 minutes, you can take up any format or you can improvise on this model as much as possible. But when you have very short time, like 90 seconds, and you want to make the most out of it, that's the time when we suggest that this format should be followed. Yeah. Research, yes. Exactly. I'll come to that in just a minute. Yeah.
Yeah, so coming back to the speech point, we have 90 seconds, and you said divide into 3 parts. So, how would you say allocate which would you give more prep? How would your time up between each of the 3 parts?
I would give equal importance to the first and the second point, which deals with the description of the agenda and the UN's work on it. And the most essential part is how does it affect my country. That is the point which requires your maximum attention.
So approximately in amount of time, how much?
15 seconds, 35 seconds, and the rest in the last point.
Okay, thank you.
I did that in my audience, so that's why I said that.